In this lesson, we're going to talk about engineering the perfect big idea. Now, this is one of the most valuable lessons in all of the modules on engineering. And so we're going to spend a significant amount of time digging deep into this idea behind the big idea. Now, before we jump in and get started, I very quickly want to remind you of the 4 key elements that make up a high conversion marketing funnel. So we've got the big idea, which we're going to go through in this lesson. We've got the lead, which is the first 500 to 800 words of your marketing funnel, your marketing campaign, regardless of the marketing funnel model, which we're going to be talking about in a later module, in a later lesson. You now understand the purpose behind the marketing argument is to establish the marketing thesis, to get your prospect to buy into the marketing thesis before we present the superior and irresistible offer. And you're going to learn about the marketing argument in a later lesson. Again, you're now familiar with this illustration. This is the path that we bring prospects through. This is kind of the path of the marketing portion of your funnel, right? And so we've already covered the offer in a prior lesson. We already covered the marketing thesis in our prior lesson. Now we're going to talk about the big idea. Now, you're already familiar with this little diagram, but I'm sharing this with you because I want you to understand where the big idea falls in the timeline of your marketing funnel. So you now know and understand that the offer is the ultimate destination of the entire funnel, right? It's the entire purpose of the funnel is ultimately to lead the prospect to accept the offer at the end of your funnel. In our prior lesson, we talked about how the thesis or the accepting of the thesis by the prospect comes at the end of the marketing portion of the funnel. And you now understand that the entire purpose of the marketing argument, the body of your marketing funnel, which you're going to learn how to craft step by step in a later module, a later lesson, the entire purpose of that marketing argument is to get that thesis accepted. And once that marketing thesis is accepted, the likelihood of that prospect accepting your offer, being converted into a new customer goes through the roof. But now I want you to understand where the big idea comes in. And you can see on this diagram that the big idea is at the beginning of the funnel. We've kind of gone from the end of the funnel and then the end of the marketing phase of the funnel. Now we're talking about the beginning of the funnel. And the entire purpose of the big idea, or the role that the big idea plays, is creating that intrigue with prospects. That is ultimately the purpose of the big idea. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty details of the big idea, I want to share with you a little bit about a piece of advice that I got a number of years ago that led to really about a 6-year exploration of the big idea and really a 6-year kind of deep dive into the big idea and what makes it tick and how it works and how you design it and everything that I'm going to share with you in this module. I want to tell you first that the big idea is one of the most valuable lessons that I've ever learned in the decade and a half that I've been involved in direct response marketing. This is one of probably just 3 or 4 lessons, all of which I'm going to be sharing with you in the E5 Camp Masterclass, that has been responsible for more success than arguably 99% of everything else that I've learned. This is one of those lessons that when you grasp this and you get this and you study this this lesson, and you put this into practice, it will forever change your marketing. When you couple this big idea with the lead, with the marketing argument, with the thesis, with the offer, your funnels will convert at a level that will astonish you and astonish other marketers. That is no joke. That is a promise that you will experience by the end of the E5 Camp Masterclass. Now, it was really Mark Ford, who you may know better by his pen name, Michael Masterson, who happens to be the marketing mastermind behind Agora, a $500 million a year newsletter publishing empire, who shared something with me one day that forever changed the course of my entire marketing career. And it was about the big idea. It was one of the first conversations that we had about the big idea, and we had many, when Mark turned to me and he said, we're really in the idea business. That's the business that we are really in as marketers. We're really in the idea business. Understand that in this context, in this lesson, I'm not talking about the idea behind your product. I'm not talking about designing the next breakthrough product or breakthrough startup or your big idea for the next, breakthrough app that you come up with. I'm talking about the idea behind your marketing message, the idea behind your marketing funnel, the idea behind your marketing campaign. See, everything we do as marketers is built on top of an idea. That idea can be proactively, intentionally developed. That idea could be a big idea, a groundbreaking idea, a startling idea, an arresting idea, a new, unique, timely, fresh idea, or it could be a plain vanilla idea, an average idea, a ho-hum idea, an idea that rolls off the back of your prospects that they've seen before, that they've heard before, that doesn't grab their interest or attention, or create engagement. Whether we're publishing a blog post, creating a video for YouTube, doing a Facebook Live, whether we are creating a marketing campaign, a marketing funnel, a sales letter, it does not matter. All of those things are built on the back of an idea. And your success, your conversion rate is based on the quality of your ideas. It's based on the back of how good your ideas are. And you're going to understand what good means objectively, not subjectively. You're going to understand how to view your ideas and put your ideas through a filter to ensure that you've got a big idea, specifically for your marketing campaigns, for your marketing funnels. This is a way today to cut through all the noise, to cut through the clutter, to separate yourself from all of the other marketing messages out there, to grab attention, to create engagement, to compel your prospects to listen to what it is that you have to say. And then ultimately, when you design your funnel or when you engineer your funnel, utilizing not only the big idea, but then a properly structured lead with a marketing argument that leads to a well-constructed thesis and then leads right into a superior and irresistible offer, you are going to convert like crazy. So why a big idea? Why is it necessary that we go through the steps to create a big idea? Why can't we just immediately begin to write copy? Why can't we use a fill-in-the-blank template for a headline? Why can't we simply scream a promise or make a big, bold claim or use one of the traditional, big promise, big benefit-driven headlines? Well, there's a number of reasons behind why we use a big idea. One, the first one I already covered, and that is that every marketing promotion is built on an idea, is built on a concept. And the quality of that idea, how compelling that idea is, how interesting that idea is, how much of an emotional chord that idea strikes with your prospects is going to ultimately determine how successful that marketing campaign is, because it plays a role in whether prospects will engage with it, because it plays a role in whether prospects will pay attention to it, will want to hear more. Next is that prospects are bombarded today more so than ever before with thousands of marketing campaigns, marketing messages, advertisements, claims, benefit statements, and promises, more so than ever before. Thousands of marketing and advertising messages every week. And today, also more so than ever before, those claims roll off the back of prospects. Why? Because they've heard it, they've seen it, they've been exposed to these claims over and over again. And today, prospects are more cynical and more skeptical than ever before because they've been exposed to more marketing, they've been exposed to more scams. And frankly, on the internet, the internet, because it is viewed as the Wild West, because anybody can put up a website today, because prospects know that the internet is really the least trustworthy of all mediums. It's not nearly as trustworthy as newspaper or print. It's not nearly as trustworthy as direct mail, because prospects know that those mediums are governed. There are rules. There are, there's the FTC that monitors direct mail and whatnot. And they know that that's not the case, at least not right now as of the publishing of this lesson as it relates to the internet. So it's the least trusted of all mediums. So because of that level of skepticism and doubt, we need to break through the clutter. We need to grab their attention. We need to convey credibility. And we do that with a big idea. Now, prospects are also bored. They're bored, right? Today, there's so much noise out there, so much that they're being bombarded with. They've been exposed to so much of the same so often that they're constantly on the lookout for new. Remember, what prospects want to know is what's new. They want new, not old. Prospects don't even want old, even if they know it works. They're still interested by new. That's where the big idea comes in. The next reason why we need a big idea is because of what I call the proliferation, of the formulaic. The proliferation of the formulaic. And what I mean by that is that within the direct response world, more and more lately, what we're seeing sold to a lot of new marketers are these formulas, these plug and play, fill in the blank templates and formulas for headlines. And prospects are seeing these things more and more, especially the claim-based or promise-based formulas behind direct marketing, right? They've seen it, they've heard it. And when they're exposed to something that they've seen and heard, they tune out. They experience what we call mental opt-out. Mental opt-out is when they see a marketing claim and they say, oh, that, I've heard that. I've seen that. Oh, that's a book that, there's a book on that. There's a YouTube video on that, right? Today, there is so much opportunity to consume information that we have to avoid the formulaic. We have to avoid seeming and looking and feeling like what they've already been exposed to. Which leads me to the next reason behind the big idea, and that is overcoming something called the categorical imperative. The categorical imperative is really this principle that says that individuals see patterns. They identify patterns of information based on what it is that they've seen before, and based on that pattern that they've seen before, they automatically categorize information. This is something that prospects experience. This is something that you and I experience. When we come across information and we identify a pattern in that information, a pattern based on other information that we've encountered before, we automatically categorize that. You see, in a lot of marketing messages today are not overcoming the categorical imperative. They're actually falling victim to that. That means that they use a formula, they use a template, they use a plug and play, fill in the blank headline or a typical approach. And what that typical approach does is it triggers the categorical imperative in prospects, and they recognize it as a sales message. They recognize it as an advertisement. They recognize it as a marketing campaign or a marketing piece. And when they do that, they immediately categorize that as marketing, and their filter goes up. We need to develop an idea that overcomes that categorical imperative, that overcomes that identification of a pattern. We have to avoid the identification of a pattern, avoid coming across as something that they've seen before, to prevent that categorical imperative reaction, to prevent that mental opt-out, and so on. And that's why we use the big idea to serve as a pattern interrupt, to present something that they don't expect, that they don't anticipate. When you display a pattern interrupt, or when you trigger what is a pattern interrupt with a big idea, you capture attention because you avoid that categorical imperative, because you present something that can't be automatically characterized. And when it meets the criteria that I'm going to teach you in this lesson, it grabs attention, it seizes attention, and creates a tremendous level of engagement and interest. And frankly, the last reason why we need a big idea, why we invest the time to develop a big idea, is because we need to differentiate your message from all the others. We need your message to stand out. Remember that a better message doesn't always get attention. A different message does, right? Better doesn't always get attention. Different does. Differentiation is one of the keys to an effective marketing funnel, to a profitable marketing funnel. Differentiating the message that you're bringing, differentiating the idea, differentiating the hook, if you will, that you are bringing to the table, differentiating your idea, your message, your funnel, your campaign, so that prospects say, wow, I've never heard that. What's that about? I want to know more. Now, I want you to understand that the big idea is really the advertisement for your funnel. It's really the advertisement for your marketing message. It's really the hook for your marketing campaign. It's not the hook for your product. It's not the hook behind your product. We already talked about that in the lesson on engineering a superior and irresistible offer. What we're talking about here is the idea for your marketing message, the idea that will get attention so that prospects engage with your marketing message, right? There's a different hook, a different unique selling proposition for your product, which we've talked about before. The big idea is the advertisement for your funnel, not the offer. And the last thing that I want to say about this before I begin to show you some examples and break down the big idea into excruciating detail for you is that the idea and the headline are also not one and the same. The headline is an expression of the idea. Every headline, just like every book title, shares or exposes, articulates, communicates an idea. One idea can be presented a number of different ways, right? With a number of different words, with a number of different verbs, right? And we're going to talk about the copy in a future lesson. But for right now, I want you to understand that the idea and the headline are two different things. The headline is the expression of the idea. It's not one and the same. So when you begin thinking about your idea by the end of this lesson, when you begin to craft and engineer and develop and think about your idea, I don't want you to begin by reciting copy. It's not about reciting copy. It's about developing an idea. Once we've got the idea, once you've developed the idea based on the criteria I'm going to show you, then you can begin to write copy, and only then. Now, to show you the monster impact of the idea and how a quality idea can forever change the quality of your marketing funnel results, take a look at this book. Take a look at this example. This is a screenshot from an ebook that I found by doing a Google search. And you can see from the title that this is all about how to outsource your business, right? How to outsourcing business for profit explained. I don't know who published this, or I don't know the author behind this. I don't know where this came from, but this is crystal clear what this is about. And you get the idea. It's a simple, plain vanilla, ordinary idea, how to outsource. I have no idea if this book sold, if it did, whether it sold in the hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, or what. My gut tells me if I was a betting man, which I'm not, I would bet that this book did not do very well. Now I want you to compare this book to this book, right? The 4-Hour Workweek. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you've at least heard about the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. This was a book that was on the New York Times bestseller for a very, very long time, really put Tim Ferriss on the map. Tim Ferriss today is worth, I think he has a net worth of somewhere about $25 million, give or take. And it all stemmed from the publishing of this book. Now, what is the difference between the content, the material covered in the 4-Hour Workweek and this book on the left, How to Outsource? Really, there's no difference. The 4-Hour Workweek is all about outsourcing your business. It's all about being able to work, quote unquote, 4 hours a week on your business by outsourcing all of the day-to-day tasks, all the day-to-day activities. The book is about outsourcing. But the difference between these two is the idea. The idea behind Tim Ferriss's book is that you can work a 4-hour week, that you can escape 9 to 5, that you can live anywhere, that you could join the new rich. The difference is not in the content. The difference is not in the material. The difference is in the idea. And that one thing alone propelled Tim on to make multiple millions of dollars and put him on the map. That's the power of one big idea. Now, what I want you to understand is I want you to understand that at the foundation of developing your big idea, it stems from the promise exposure spectrum. Now, you've already seen this, and I've already explained this to you in a prior module, in a prior lesson. But what I want you to understand is that the idea behind your marketing funnel, behind your marketing campaign, must match the stage on the promise exposure spectrum where your prospects fall. I've said before, and you've heard me say this before, and you'll hear me say this numerous times again throughout the E5 Camp Masterclass, and that is that one of the biggest reasons for marketing funnel failure is an immature marketing message. An immature marketing message, meaning a marketing message that is based on a level of promise exposure spectrum or a stage of the promise exposure spectrum below where your prospects are. It's designing a marketing message and ultimately a marketing idea that is based on, let's say, the promise stage when your prospects are at the promise and unique mechanism stage. You need to understand that an immature marketing message will always fall flat. And so your big idea needs to stem from what stage on the promise exposure spectrum is are your prospects at. And we've already covered that in a prior module. Now, these books right here are a great example, or an unfortunate example, of marketing campaigns, marketing ideas, if you will, that are way too immature for where the market is at today. So on the left-hand side, we see natural weight loss revealed, how to lose weight the natural way. You can see that, right? This is really, if we go back, this is really a promise stage marketing message. All it is making a promise, right? How to lose weight the natural way. Not how to lose 20 pounds a week, not how to lose 20 pounds a week with XYZ mechanism, but simply how to lose weight the natural way. The one on the right, weight loss and maintenance basics, your basic guide to understanding weight loss and management. These two products, unfortunately, there's no way that they're going to sell today. I have no idea how old these are. Again, these are screenshots that I took from a Google search, but these are examples of a marketing idea, the idea behind these things that are way too immature for where the market is at today. Why? Because the market has heard this. They've seen it. This is the kind of thing that is going to trigger mental opt-out. This is immediately recognizable as information that I can get anywhere, information that's been available, information that I've seen before. The market is well beyond this in terms of their sophistication. Here are two more examples. The one on the left says, get found online. Get found, get leads, get customers. The one on the right, another cover, is get rich on the internet. The simple way to make money online. Again, two examples of immature marketing messages, ideas. Remember, these are just ideas because there's a lot of different ways. You could come up with a much better, much more compelling idea, a much bigger idea based on what it is that I'm going to teach you in this lesson than get rich on the internet. That's an idea. Forget the copy. That's an idea that is elementary. That's an idea that is way too basic. That's an idea that is way too immature for where prospects today are at on the promise exposure spectrum. And so both of these books, if they're even still being sold, which I highly doubt, are not being bought, or they're being bought by a tiny, tiny percentage of the most unsophisticated prospects in the entire market. This is not what you want to duplicate. Here are two more examples. The one on the right, write your book, a simple strategy to complete your manuscript without wasted time or effort. Book on the right, write your ebook or other short book fast. Two more examples of an immature marketing idea, of an idea that is too plain vanilla, that is too ordinary, that is too basic, that's already been seen before, that's already been presented before, that is way too immature for where the marketplace for these type of publications is at in terms of the promise exposure spectrum. Now, you already know where your market is at from an earlier module, an earlier lesson during the examination stage. I want you to understand that your idea needs to stem from your understanding of what stage of the 5 stages of the promise exposure spectrum are your prospects within. Because again, like I just said, the single biggest reason for marketing funnel failure, for poor sales conversions from any marketing campaign or funnel, is an immature marketing message. That stems from an immature marketing idea. Right? The marketing message stems from the marketing idea. And when it's too immature, it falls flat. Take a look at the difference between these two campaigns. On the left, we've got a campaign or an idea that says the secret to Wall Street's fastest profits. Right? A very simple, plain vanilla, Ordinary Idea. This is a product that's selling a financial investing newsletter, a $47 a year newsletter. The same thing that the ad on the right was selling. Now, the ad on the right is from Porter Stansberry at Stansberry Research from well over a decade ago. This is also selling a $47 a year newsletter. But look at the difference in idea between these two. And I just want you to start to kind of see this and feel this, because we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details of how you construct a big idea in just a second. In fact, we're going to begin to do this on the very next slide. The Porter's ad says there's a new railroad across America and it's making some people very rich. In fact, one ex-bond trader with a mixed track record made $1.8 million per day for 540 straight days. You can see just from previewing this ad that there's something that's interesting intellectually about this. The idea that there's a new railroad across America and it's making some people very rich. What do you mean? Railroad across America. What do you mean? It's a new railroad. How is it making some people very rich? And then there is a very concrete, very specific, kind of implied promise there that there's a benefit there that, right, because of this new railroad, that when you learn what it is and when you understand what it is, you can have results similar to this one ex-bond trader that made 1.8 million per day for 540 straight days. The difference between the two is in the idea. The copy stems from the underlying idea. The marketing campaign on the left, ordinary, plain vanilla, seen before. The one on the right, at the time of the publishing, it was new, unique, different. It was a big idea, and it went on to do millions of dollars for Stansberry Research and put them on the map. Today, they're a $100 million plus per year division of Agora. So let's begin to break this down. We're going to start high level, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details of what makes for a big idea and how you develop a big idea. So first and foremost, the core of a big idea is that it taps into one emotion. It makes one promise. It's based on one story, and it leads prospects to think about one thing. Right? And the core here, there are two kind of elements to what it is that I'm sharing with you on this slide. The first is the elements, right? That it taps into one emotion. We talked about this in an earlier lesson when we were in the examination stage, the idea of the dominant resident emotion, the idea of how do your prospects feel right now? Are they scared? Are they hopeful? What is the emotion that they have? What is the one emotion that your idea is leveraging, is prodding, is tapping into? We've got the promise. Of course, right? You're going to learn what the primary promise is. At the root of all good marketing, at the root of all effective marketing is a powerful and enticing and compelling promise of transformation of outcome. So every big idea has a promise of transformation, a promise of result, a promise of benefit. Then there is a story. Now, I don't necessarily mean a narrative. I'm not talking in this context about the hero's journey or a specific story. I'm really talking about, in essence, one plot line, one theme. You're not mixing in a variety of different themes. You're not mixing in a variety of different storylines and plot lines. You're going to see examples of how it's one story, it's one plot line, it's one theme that runs out. It's one long thread from beginning to end. And then one thing to think, right? Which is ultimately the thesis. Right? It's ultimately the marketing thesis, which we talked about, which we covered in detail in the prior lesson. That's the first kind of category that I want you to notice. The second category that I want you to notice is one. Is the power of one. And I had this drilled into me many moons ago by Mark Ford. The idea that a great marketing idea, a big marketing idea, is one idea. It's not a mix of ideas. It's not a bunch of ideas. It's one single idea. See, what Mark really taught me very early on was that weak marketing messages are crowded with mediocre ideas. What happens is, because marketers don't invest the time to develop a big idea, because they don't understand what you're about to learn, they end up trying to prop up and make their idea behind their marketing funnel more compelling, more interesting by bringing in a variety of mediocre ideas, by incorporating in a bunch of different ideas. And the hope is that if they incorporate a bunch of mediocre ideas, that it'll lead to, a gigantic collection of, a powerful set of ideas. But a bunch of mediocre ideas in your funnel, building your funnel on the back of mediocre ideas only makes for a weaker marketing message. I want you to think about from the prior lesson when we talked about the marketing funnel thesis, right? And I talked about how it's very similar to the thesis of an essay. And I gave you examples of the thesis and I showed you how to construct that thesis. And right, imagine if you were crafting an essay or you were crafting an argument and you had your thesis about, let's say, the vegetarian diet, right? That the vegetarian and Mediterranean, the thing that I made up, and how it was the most effective diet for lowering cholesterol naturally and keeping it low. Well, imagine if you started to incorporate in, how if you decided to couple that with exercise, when you combine it with exercise, that it'll help to build muscle as well. And, if your headline started off with, a story about how it was first discovered at Stanford University, but then you started to get into how bodybuilders in the Ukraine also discovered, it's a bunch of mediocre ideas. It's a bunch of mediocre ideas that marketers bring together in hopes of having a collection of powerful ideas. But what it really does is it makes for a weak marketing message. You need to narrow your focus to one idea, to one emotion, to one promise, to one story, to one thing that you want your prospects to think. And so let's go through the elements of a big idea. Like I said, like I just hopefully hammered into you, it's one great idea. A big idea is one great idea, not a mix of mediocre ideas. It has a big, believable promise of transformation, of result, of outcome, right? And so it's one idea and it has a promise built in and it's unique. This is so critical. These are all critical, but this is one that I want to hammer into you, that it's unique. The idea is original. The idea is unexpected. The idea is different from what the prospect has seen before. That is key. You need to recognize that it's a big idea, right? It's not a big idea unless it is a different idea than what prospects have already seen. Unless it is original, it's not a big idea. That's what I mean by unique. It's new and fresh. You've got to recognize that it needs to be something new, right? When it's different from what prospects have seen before, then it's new. You have to recognize that familiarity in marketing breeds disinterest. It can't be something that your prospects are already familiar with, not if you want to create a high level of engagement and interest. And it needs to be fresh. It needs to feel timely. It needs to feel new. It needs to feel like it's about something that's either about to happen or something that's happening right now. It can't feel like it's dated, like it's old, like it's outdated. It has to be new and fresh. It has to be specific, right? Specifics sell, vagueness does not. It has to be concrete, tangible, right? Not vague. You don't want to make a vague promise. You don't want to make vague claims. You don't want to have a vague idea. Concrete, tangible, specific. It needs to be arresting. It needs to be startling. That means that it needs to shock prospects out of their complacency. It needs to wake them up from the funk that a lot of prospects are in as they search the internet, right? It needs to be arresting. It needs to be good. And it needs to be easy to grasp. Really, it needs to be immediately understandable. It needs to have instant appeal, right? Like it can't be complicated. Recognize that if they have to read on to understand, or if they have to watch the rest of your video in your marketing funnel to understand what you're talking about, it's not going to resonate. It's not going to create the engagement that you need. If it's also not an idea that if it's too complex or if it's outside of their scope, if you're talking to women and you're trying to incorporate an idea about an engine in a car, unless you're talking to female mechanics, it's not going to be immediately understandable to them. And so it needs to be instantly grasped by the prospect. Now, it's important that you avoid what is typically referred to as the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is really this cognitive bias that occurs when we're predicting in other people what it is that they understand. We typically overestimate what it is that they will understand based on our own level of knowledge. What happens is, over time, as you become more and more versed in your topic, in whatever it is that you are creating a marketing funnel about, whatever it is that you are ultimately marketing and selling, the level of understanding that your prospects have to have in order to kind of pace with you tends to rise. And what happens is a lot of marketers speak in a language, they use words and terms and phrases that are far too down the curve, if you will, meaning they're far too advanced for where the prospect is at. You have to make sure that you take yourself out of your own thinking. You have to think like a prospect. You have to see it from their view, not your view. You have to recognize that odds are you are an expert at your topic and your prospects are not. Remember, you need to develop ideas and eventually, when we get to the marketing argument, communicate in a way that resonates with their level of understanding, not your own level of understanding. There are things that you may think are elementary, are basic, are below, are below your knowledge, your understanding, your grasp of the topic. And they may be, but that doesn't mean that it's below your prospect. That doesn't mean that it's below the level that you should communicate. You need to avoid the curse of knowledge. And you need to recognize that simple is better. That simple is better. The human brain is hardwired to trust simple things. Simplicity encourages belief. I know that that may go against what it is that you kind of think or what it is that maybe we've been led to believe or led to feel, right? That complex things are more believable because they seem more well thought out. But the fact is that the human brain is hardwired to trust simple. Simplicity encourages belief. When somebody can see it as simple, when it can be explained simply, when it can be grasped simply, it encourages belief. As well, you've got to recognize that a confused mind will absolutely not pay attention, will not engage. And of course, if they don't engage, if they don't pay attention, they certainly will not buy. And so you've got to make sure that you put yourself in your prospect's shoes when you're thinking about an idea. The idea cannot be beyond their level of knowledge, their level of understanding. A great example of this, and I can't remember where it is that I first got this from, but this is a great example of making something simple extremely complex. This is the pomelo. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Citrus maxima or Citrus grandis is a citrus fruit native to Southeast Asia. It's usually pale green to yellow when ripe, with sweet, white, or more rarely pink or red flesh, and a very thick, spongy rind. It is the largest citrus fruit, 15 to 25 centimeters in diameter, and usually weighing 1 to 2 kilograms. That is a complex explanation of what could have been explained as a pomelo is basically a supersized grapefruit with a very thick and soft rind. That's the difference between complex and simple. Avoid the curse of knowledge. This is the formula for the big idea. And we're going to break this down and we're going to talk about each component in detail. EC stands for emotionally compelling. And your idea is emotionally compelling when it's built on a primary promise, a promise of transformation, result, outcome, and when that promise is delivered by a unique mechanism, the unique piece, part, component, process, aspect of your product or service that delivers the result, that fulfills the promise. That's when it is emotionally compelling. And II stands for intellectually interesting. What this is about is appealing to both the head and the heart. It's about appealing to both logic as well as emotion. You can't have one without the other if you want a complete airtight argument for your product, for your marketing funnel. Emotionally compelling because it has a primary promise that's exciting, which we're going to cover in a second, powered by a unique mechanism, and it's also intellectually interesting. There's an interesting element to your idea that the prospect would be interested in learning more about, even if there was no primary promise or unique mechanism. So let's talk about the primary promise. So first and foremost, this is one of the most important elements of every marketing campaign, of every marketing funnel. Really, everything else stems from the power of the primary promise, because ultimately this is what tells prospects they stand to gain by engaging with your marketing funnel, by paying attention, by reading more or watching more. And so your primary promise must be big, bold, audacious, and true and believable. It's got to be big. It's got to be exciting. It's got to be compelling. Your promise has to be the biggest, boldest, most audacious thing that you can promise to prospects that is true and believable. That's true and believable. And the message, the idea has to be believable, not just true. Remember, not everything that is believable is true, and not everything that's true is believable. Your idea, your promise specifically, must be believable and true. That the believability comes from the specificity. It comes from from being concrete, from the definiteness behind your idea. But it's got to be big. It's got to be exciting enough for your prospects to want to continue to watch. It's got to be compelling enough for them to want it. It's why I say that prospects need to lust after that payoff. They need to lust after that transformation. They need to lust after that result, right? And that promise is all about the transformation. It's all about the result. It's all about the outcome. It goes back to the now and after grid. It goes back to what does that after look like that they want? What is the most exciting, most compelling thing that they ultimately are craving, that they want, that they are lusting after, that they would love to experience in their life based on where they are right now? You have to get as close to that as you possibly can while being truthful and believable. Your promise ultimately needs to be backed by a preponderance of proof. Now, we're going to be talking about proof and the various proof points later on in a later module and lesson. But in this context, what I want you to understand is that you have to have proof to back up your primary promise, right? And the promise can't be bigger than the biggest proof point. Let me say that again. The promise can't be bigger than the biggest proof point. Meaning, the better the proof, the better the evidence, the bigger the promise can be. But the promise has to be backed by proof. You can't make a big promise that has no proof, because all you're doing is making an unsubstantiated claim that will roll off the back of your prospects. And so it needs to be backed with powerful proof. So your promise can only be as big as the proof that you collect, which we're going to talk about later on in this lesson. The next thing that I'll share with you is really an add-on, and that is that when possible, in an ideal scenario, your promise addresses an urgent problem that your prospect has, right? Your promise conveys that you will solve an urgent problem. And the more urgent and severe and significant that problem is, the more powerful, the more valuable your promise becomes, right? The more urgent and pressing the problem, the more valuable the promise of solution, right? You think about how much do you value a solution, that the value of that solution is dependent on how urgent and severe the problem is that it solves. And ultimately, your promise is powered by a unique mechanism, which we're going to be talking about in just a couple of slides. What you want to trigger with your primary promise is you ultimately want prospects to say, this is exactly what I've been waiting for, right? This changes everything. That's the response that you want prospects to have to your promise. Right? So it can't be little, it can't be weak, it can't be fragile. It's got to be big, bold, audacious, true, and believable. Now, one of the ways that you can begin to think about your primary promise He's using what I call the magic wand technique. And the magic wand technique is simply this. If you could wave a magic wand and grant your prospects anything, any transformation, any outcome, any result, any difference in their life based on their current problem and the solution, if you will, that you're providing, if you could grant them anything, what would they ask for? What would that magic result be? That's where we want to start, right? You want to use that blue sky thinking. You want to think blue sky, no restrictions to your thinking. If you could wave a magic wand and grant them anything related to their current situation and problem, what would that look like? From there, you want to back it down until you can engineer that promise to be true and believable. It always, always, always has to be truthful, always, always has to be believable, and always, always has to be backed up with a piece of proof. And the bigger the promise, the earlier and the bigger the proof point needs to come into play. Again, you're going to learn that later on. The next thing that you can do to begin thinking about the primary promise is to think about what I call the ideal client exercise. And this is where you simply just imagine the client or the customer in your world that is your greatest success story. I don't mean the greatest success story that you've already had. I mean, if you had a client and you would say, you could picture a client in your head, a fictitious client, a future client, and they became your greatest success story. They were your greatest testimonial, your greatest case study, your greatest success story. Well, what result did they experience? What result did they get from working with you? What was the outcome? What was the transformation? What changed for them? What happened for them? What aren't they experiencing that they were experiencing before that they're glad they're not experiencing? What are they experiencing now that they're thrilled, head over heels thrilled that they are experiencing? As well, what other transformations happened in their life because of those core changes, right? What else? What ancillary? What additional benefits are they experiencing now because of the underlying or the main benefits, the main results? I want you to think about that, because if that would be your greatest success story, then that should play a role in the promise that you ultimately design. Again, you just want to make sure that you back it down to where it's true, believable, and backed by proof. That's the primary promise. It's the single biggest, most audacious promise of result and transformation that you could make to your prospect that's true and believable. Now, as I said, that primary promise is powered and backed by a unique mechanism. Now, I've already talked a bit about the unique mechanism throughout our prior lessons and modules, but I want to cover this in more detail for you so you understand how to flesh out your unique mechanism and make sure that you actually have a unique mechanism. So again, what is the unique mechanism? It's simply the unique piece, part, component, aspect, process, or system of your product or service that delivers on the primary promise for prospects. It's the unique ingredient, unique element, unique component that gives your prospect the result. It's the reason why your product or service works. It's the reason why your prospect will experience the outcome when they engage with or use your product, your service, if you will. And the unique mechanism is what gives your prospects hope. It gives them hope in your product or service. It gives them hope in what it is that you are talking about. It gives them hope in the content that you are delivering through your marketing funnel. It gives them hope in your offer. It gives them hope that maybe this time around they will experience the result that's eluded them before, the result that they didn't get from the other products, the other services, the other things that they've bought, right? Because they view the unique mechanism as the thing that they've been missing, the one thing that they haven't tried, the one thing that's been missing from all the other products and services and programs and whatnot that they've bought, that they've purchased, that they've tried, that never came to fruition, that never gave them the result. And so it gives them hope that maybe this time things will be different because of the unique mechanism, because they've never tried another product or program with this mechanism. And so maybe this is the difference. Maybe this is the difference maker. As well, the unique mechanism is what prevents what I call the funnel Google slap. Google slap is when somebody is listening to what it is that they're hearing from a marketer, and the marketer says something that is generic. Remember, we're not selling the generic. We're not marketing a generic solution. We're marketing a proprietary solution. It's proprietary because you're the only one that is offering this unique mechanism. You're the only product, the only software, the only program, the only vendor of this unique mechanism. And so because of that, you are offering a proprietary solution. You're not selling the generic. When you sell the generic, like Facebook ads, or, how to advertise on Facebook, or how to advertise on Google, or 5 ways to grow bigger tomatoes, or 6 ways to lose belly fat. What you're selling is a commodity, is the generic, is the common. And what that does is it allows prospects to press pause on your video, to go over to Google and to type in the generic, the 5 ways to lose belly fat, the 5 ways to grow a greener lawn, right? If you're selling them on, a fat burner, and the reason why your fat burner works is because of L-carnitine, an amino acid, all they have to do is press pause on your video, go over to Google and type in L-carnitine. That's an example of a marketing message, of a marketing idea that is conveying the common, the commodity, and it can create and cause this Google slap where somebody can go and get information on it from Google, get a cheaper source from Google. We never, ever, ever market a commodity or the common. You're marketing a proprietary solution because you're the only vendor, you're the only purveyor of the product, a product with this unique mechanism. Now, there are 3 different types of mechanisms, and I want you to understand that the unique mechanism is a marketing invention. That means that what I want you to understand is that there are 3 different ways. Only one of the ways entails you actually having a unique mechanism in your product or service. The other 2 ways are a marketing creation. So let's talk about that. The first way, or the first type of unique mechanism, is what I call the actual mechanism. An actual mechanism is when you actually have a unique piece, part, component, process, aspect, system of your product or service. It's when you actually have a unique algorithm in your software. It's when you have a unique method that nobody else teaches or nobody else uses for your massage therapy, right? It's when you actually have a unique ingredient in your sauce, in your recipe for sauce, right? From the old country or something. It's when you actually have a unique mechanism. Typically, we see this in the software world, or really in commerce in general, when something gets patented, right? That's when they actually have a unique mechanism that powers their product. But more often than not, your product or service may not have an actual mechanism. That's when you're going to use one of the other 2 types of mechanisms. The second type of unique mechanism is what I refer to as the unspoken mechanism. And the unspoken mechanism means that it's not unique amongst your competitors, but it is unique to your prospects because none of your competitors are talking about it. A unique mechanism is not necessarily unique amongst you and your competitors. In other words, it's not necessarily just you that has it. It may be just you that's marketing it, just you that's talking about it. Now, this stems from the story of legendary ad man Claude Hopkins, who was brought in by Schlitz Beer to do the marketing, to redo their marketing, to kind of in hopes of capturing market share. And they took him on a tour of one of their facilities. And while he was on tour at one of their facilities, he saw something going on in the corner. And he said, "Well, what's going on over there?" And the guy who was taking him on tour, as the story goes, or as the legend goes, said to him, "Oh, that's where we sterilize all of our bottles. All of our bottles go through that sterilization process before we put any beer in there." And Claude Hopkins immediately said, "Well, why aren't you telling anybody about this? Like, why aren't you using that to talk about the quality of your beer, the pureness of your beer, that you go through the sterilization process?" And the gentleman who was showing him around the facility said, "Well, that's because every beer manufacturer does and uses the same sterilization process." And Claude Hopkins looked at him and said, "But nobody's talking about it. Nobody's presenting it to the market. Nobody's sharing it with the market." And so what Claude Hopkins did was he created an entire marketing campaign around that unspoken mechanism. And even though other competitors had that mechanism, while he was the first and only one to really talk about it at the time, Schlitz Beer ended up recapturing a tremendous amount of market share because of the use of that unspoken mechanism. And so you've got to think about your product, your service, and what is it that is part of that helps to deliver the result for prospects that maybe isn't unique amongst your competitors, but nobody else is talking about it. See, if nobody else is talking about it and you do talk about it, it can be a unique mechanism. It may be a temporary unique mechanism until competitors see that it's working for you, and then they begin to say, hey, we have that also. But before they do that, you will get attention, create hope, and ultimately create a spike in conversions. And so that's the second type of unique mechanism. The third type is the one that I tend to use and see most often, and I refer to it as the transubstantiated mechanism. Now, this comes from the idea of what's called transubstantiation. Now, I was first exposed to this from Bill Bonner at Agora. Bill Bonner is the founder of Agora, again, a $500 million a year direct response behemoth. And the idea of transubstantiation really comes from Roman Catholicism. When in Roman Catholicism with communion, when the wine becomes the blood of Christ. In the context of Roman Catholicism, it is turning the wine into blood. In this context, the secret of transubstantiation is the idea of turning something ordinary into something extraordinary. It's taking something that could be viewed or could be presented as ordinary and turning it into something that is extraordinary. And so this is a pure marketing invention. I don't mean it's a lie. I mean it's a marketing creation. Let me give you some examples of a transubstantiated mechanism. All of these, or many of these, you are absolutely familiar with and have been exposed to. So the first one is a tripwire. This comes from Ryan and Perry over at Digital Marketer. And a tripwire was something that they first presented a handful of years ago as of the publishing of this lesson. And a tripwire, as they presented it, was all about a low-cost, low barrier of entry offer that was to be made to prospects to turn them into customers. Now, while today the tripwire is associated with Ryan and Perry, Digital Marketer, the idea of a low-cost, low-price offer is nothing new. It's been around for years. It's been around for decades. It's been a staple in the world of direct response marketing. It's nothing new. But if Ryan and Perry were to have presented a simple, low-cost offer to the market, they would have been presenting a commodity. They would have been marketing and selling the generic. They would have been marketing and selling the common, and they wouldn't have got the traction that they got. And so they combined their entire, formula for designing marketing by creating this proprietary term for one piece of their methodology, and they called it the tripwire. And what ended up happening was a lot of marketers that saw that said, that's what I've been missing. That's the reason why I've been struggling. That's what I need. And they had hope that their methodology was going to pay off. And for many, it has, but nothing new. They took the ordinary low cost, low barrier of entry offer and transubstantiated it into something extraordinary called the tripwire offer. There is the reverse add-on offer. This is one of my terms that we use at Marketing Funnel Automation. This is really also nothing new. We've applied it differently, but a reverse add-on offer is really just a cross sell. It's really what McDonald's does, if you will, when McDonald's asks you if you want fries with that. That's not an upsell, right? That's an add-on offer. It's lower priced than the main offer, right? You buy a meal at McDonald's, it's whatever it is, $8 or $6, I don't even know what it is, at McDonald's. And then they ask you if you want fries for an extra dollar or an apple pie or whatever for an extra, buck or $2, whatever it is. That's a reverse add-on, right? But so if I simply called it an add-on or an upsell, right, then it would have been viewed as commonplace. It would have been viewed as ordinary. So we have a twist on it. And so we gave it a proprietary name and we transubstantiated the common or the ordinary into the extraordinary. And the same thing with our customer captivation offer. It's a type of offer made on the front end as part of our 6-figure funnel formula program that is not low price, but is not high price. It's not even mid-tier. And we transubstantiated the ordinary into the extraordinary. Same thing with my buddy, Russell Brunson, extremely savvy marketer, extremely savvy entrepreneur. He put together what he called the invisible funnel. Now, the invisible funnel was based on the idea of a soft offer, right? Something that I explained to you in the lesson on engineering a superior and irresistible offer. He created a kind of a process that was built on the back of a soft offer, and then he named the process, and he gave the process a proprietary name called the invisible funnel. Transubstantiated the ordinary into the extraordinary. Mass Control, a product that Frank Kern, a fairly popular online marketer, used to sell. Mass Control was really nothing more than an email marketing, email copywriting program. But Frank knew wisely that if he simply sold an email marketing or email copywriting program, that the market had heard that, the market had seen that, the market wouldn't have bought into that, the market wouldn't have been compelled, and he would be competing with everybody else that was offering and selling and marketing an email marketing and copywriting course. And so he took this whole idea, his whole style, his whole methodology, his whole approach to email marketing and email copywriting, and he bundled it under the term of mass control. He wasn't selling individuals on email marketing. He was selling them on the methodology known as mass control. Now you can see from the prior lesson on the marketing thesis, right, that at the time, and this is me speculating, I don't remember, from memory, but, Frank's thesis, his thesis solution was mass control, this particular specific methodology of email marketing. His marketing thesis was all about how you'll get the best response, you'll develop a cool tribe, you'll convert like crazy when you use the mass control method, not ordinary email marketing. And so mass control was the unique mechanism. And there are other examples that I can share with you. This was something that I created for a client, I think actually Charles Kirkland. This was a combination of 3 different common traffic generation tactics that, if presented as those three separate traffic generation tactics simply combined, it would have been the ordinary. But because Charles combined these in a unique way, we gave it a proprietary name and we changed the ordinary into the extraordinary. This last one is from my buddy Rich Schefren. And off of the back of this idea of being a strategic entrepreneur, he launched a multi-million-dollar brand. He did about $3 million in 1 week, an additional $10 million over the next 12 months with this. He took the idea that the reason why marketers were overwhelmed was because they were operating as opportunity seekers. And what they really needed to do was operate as a strategic entrepreneur. And he named it. He labeled it. He transubstantiated the ordinary of being an entrepreneur with the right understanding of the fundamentals of business, right? And he labeled it. And he transformed that whole idea of just being an entrepreneur with the deep understanding of systems and the fundamentals of being a business. And he made it a strategic entrepreneur and labeled it. And it created multiple millions of dollars for him. And so that is the third way that you create a unique mechanism. Again, what you're looking for is a unique element within your product or service that delivers the promise to your prospects. It's as simple as that. So at this point, we've talked about how your big idea is emotionally compelling because it is built on the back of a primary promise that's powered by a unique mechanism. Now we need to talk about what it means to be intellectually interesting. Intellectually interesting means that it really should feel like news. It should feel like a discovery. It should feel like, for prospects, they just stumbled on a news item, right? And the response that we're ultimately looking for is, wow, this is big, right? Wow, this is big, right? From an intellectually interesting perspective. It should generate a feeling of discovery for your prospects, like they just discovered something new. It should trigger this aha moment, right? The idea should feel correct. It should feel insightful. It should trigger in your prospect this, I've never thought of that. I've never seen it that way. I've never heard of that. I've never been told that, right? Again, intellectually interesting, and it should trigger curiosity. They should want to know more about that. Now, the thing that I'm going to share with you, because I'm about to show you a bunch of examples, and then I'm going to explain how you develop these ideas and where to look and the whole process for you. And so we're not even halfway through this lesson, is that when you're developing your ideas, you cannot be afraid to ruffle feathers or embarrass yourself. You cannot be afraid to ruffle feathers. You can't be afraid to say something that is going to polarize you in the eyes of your market. You can't be afraid to say something that is slightly embarrassing. You've got to be willing to go big. In order to get attention, in order to create engagement today, it takes an awful lot to cut through the noise. And so you cannot be afraid to ruffle feathers or embarrass yourself. Let's go through a few examples of real world big ideas. This happens to be from the financial investing newsletter business, and I want you to simply see two elements here. So we've got, take action before November 8th and watch the secret $50 marijuana stock blueprint turn a single $50 bill into a massive fortune. Now is the right time to bet big on marijuana. The industry is poised to be gigantic. CNBC. I want you to see a couple of key elements in here right away. Number one, fresh and timely. Take action before November 8th, right? So it's fresh. It's timely. It doesn't feel old. It's something new. It's something that at the time that I took the screenshot was pending, was impending, was about to happen. Second is we've got secret $50 marijuana stock blueprint, right? That feels like, it triggers curiosity. It feels like news, especially because take action before November 8th. Why? What's going to happen on November 8th? What happens if I miss this? As well as this, intellectually as an investor, right? Like, what is this $50 marijuana stock blueprint? And then you've got the payoff. You've got the promise. You've got the result. Turn a single $50 bill into a massive fortune, right? Now, I would have liked to have seen this be a little bit more specific and concrete rather than, I'd rather have seen it say, turn a single $50 bill into a minimum of $5,600.52 or $5,600 in the next 30 days. But I wanted to show you this as an example. And then, of course, right, we've got the unique mechanism is built into the intellectually interesting part, the secret $50 marijuana stock blueprint. That's the unique mechanism. The reason why you can turn a single $50 bill into a massive fortune is because of the secret $50 marijuana stock blueprint. And then, of course, that last piece right underneath the subhead is the proof point, using CNBC as a proof point. So they made a big claim, a big promise, right, backed by a unique mechanism, a fresh, unique, timely idea that was immediately backed up by a proof point. Here's another example. This is from my friends over at Agora Financial. So this says urgent IPO investment opportunity. New gene hacking technology ends all disease. MIT Technology Review called it the biggest biotech discovery of the century. The genius scientists behind this technology just founded a new startup, and all our sources point to it going public Tuesday, October 18th. So you've got an intellectually interesting idea. New gene hacking technology ends all disease. That's just an intellectually interesting idea. You've got something that feels new and fresh and timely, urgent IPO investment opportunity. You also have the date at the bottom, right? That Tuesday, October 18th, when I first took the screenshot, that was upcoming. You've got credibility, proof with MIT technology, right? So MIT is a proof point. And then you've got an implied promise, an implied benefit, right? And knowing this market, right? IPOs are perceived to be where gigantic fortunes are made, where you can make big money. So this is an intellectually interesting idea that's backed up with a proof point that's fresh and timely and implies that you can get in on this IPO as long as you engage before October 18th. So you've got a reason to pay attention right now. You've got an intellectually interesting idea. You've got an implied payoff, right? And you've got proof right there. Then we've got this is certainly older, how the coming Obamageddon can help smart capitalists get rich. So you've got the coming Obamageddon, an interesting, unique word, if you will, and how the coming, right, it's fresh, timely, and then, of course, right, the Obamageddon and how you can kind of leverage that, if you will, is the unique mechanism, right? It's a unique opportunity, it's the unique mechanism, the unique reason why the promise can come to fruition. Excuse me. And then, of course, in the subhead, you've got the promise, a historic opportunity that could turn $10,000 into $474,030 in 12 to 24 months. Specificity, concreteness. And so you've got a big idea. Look at this. This says new federal legislation has created a $42 billion opportunity. I didn't screen capture the rest of that, but so you've got intellectually interesting new federal legislation. Well, what new federal legislation? There's not a whole lot of specificity in this. And this isn't the greatest example, but I just wanted you to see the divide between intellectually interesting and emotionally compelling, right? That there's a $42 billion opportunity. Why? Because of the new federal legislation. In this example, that new federal legislation, timely, fresh, serves as the unique mechanism, the unique reason why there is an opportunity. This one was kind of interesting. Fountain of youth discovered, fact or fairy tale, intellectually interesting idea. Has medical science discovered the magic bullet that can reverse the aging process and let you slice 20 years off your current age? Underneath this was proof points, credibility factors, but you've got this intellectually interesting idea, and then you've got this implied promise, reverse the aging process and slice 20 years off your current age. This is another example from the folks over at Stansberry Research. Top tech giants spawn limited time second chance to get rich with 292 shares. Google returned 20% in the past 2 years, but the 292C equivalent share soared more than 300% in half the time. Amazon shares returned 271% in the past 4 years, but the 292C equivalent returned an extraordinary 2,470% during the same period. So you've got this intellectually interesting idea, or what would be to investors, that these top tech giants are spawn this limited time, second chance opportunity to get rich with 292C shares. So there's time sensitivity, right? It's happening now. It's new. It's fresh. It's intellectually interesting. What are 292C shares? And it's really like if you Google 292C shares, what you're going to find is Stansberry Research. That's what's going to come up. You can actually do that search. And then there is this implied promise that if I understand how to get into these 292C shares, I can generate returns of extraordinary levels well beyond the levels that I'm getting from the typical shares that I'm investing in right now. And so intellectually interesting, timely, fresh, unique, different, proprietary, unique mechanism, 292C shares, great example. And our last example was also a home run campaign, also out of the financial world. And I tend to use the financial world because Agora built the back of their business, a $500 million empire, because of their ideas. They're so far behind internet marketing technology in terms of the tactics and the bells and the whistles that you see used by so many novice or new marketers or average marketers in the internet marketing community, but yet they've built massive fortunes, multi-million-dollar divisions that add up to this $500 million a year empire because of the quality of their ideas and the quality of their marketing arguments and copy. And so this was The Secret Currency, How the World's Wealthiest Families Make Money Even When Stocks, Bonds, and Real Estate lose value. And I cut off the rest. There's a secret currency that exists that lies beyond the reach of any government. And then it talks about how you can get access to it and you can make a fortune just like the wealthiest families have. Now, the interesting thing is that this leads me to the next component to consider when developing a big idea, and that is the use of a metaphor. Because in this example, the secret currency was a metaphor. It was a metaphor for gold, right? This was all about investing in gold. But Mike Palmer, the copywriter who wrote this for Stansberry Research, knew that if he said invest in gold, that it would be too immature. It would be an idea that was too immature. See, they could have simply said how to invest in gold and get wealthy, or how to invest in gold and protect your retirement account. But that was an immature marketing idea for their prospects. Their prospects have heard that before. They've seen that before. They've been exposed to that before, and they knew that it would roll off their back. They had to come up with a better, unique, different, new, fresh, compelling idea. And so they did it using the power of a metaphor, the secret currency, how the world's wealthiest families make money even when stocks, bonds, and real estate lose value. All this is about is that they use gold, right? They use gold, but Mike knew that he couldn't say that or else mental opt-out. So let me explain how you use a metaphor. There are two ways to use a metaphor in marketing in general, but certainly as part of your big idea. The first is if you are dealing with a complex topic, if you're dealing with a topic that is difficult to grasp, that's complex, that might be a little bit unknown to your market. You're dealing with something, so new or so different that it's outside of the realm of your market's understanding. That's when you want to use a metaphor, because what a metaphor does is it connects the unknown to something known. It takes the complex and makes it simple by wrapping it in a metaphor that makes it extremely easy for your prospects to grasp. And a great book, as a side note, for you to get and read if you want to really learn more about metaphors and metaphor construction and the use of metaphors in communication and marketing and selling, is the book Metaphorical Selling. Metaphorical Selling. It's a book that I go through maybe once a year, and it's just great. And it really shows you several examples of metaphors in marketing context, in a communication context, and how to create them. Very, very easy book to read. Great book, deep book. You'll love it. But a metaphor connects the unknown to the known. That's the most common use for a metaphor. It simplifies a complex idea by attaching it to something that your prospect can immediately recognize. The second use of a metaphor is what we just saw from Mike Palmer with the secret currency. And that's when you're connecting the known to the unknown, meaning you are hiding the common under the wrapper of a metaphor. That's what Mike Palmer did here with the secret currency. He took the known and he made it unknown. He made it mysterious. He made it compelling. He made it a unique mechanism, if you will, by presenting it as this metaphor of the secret currency. This is a great example of the second way of using a metaphor. This is a simple example of a metaphor, right? Scientists are calling this smart pill Viagra for the brain. You immediately get Viagra for the brain, right? It immediately conjures an image in your mind. This is another one. This is one of my favorite promotions that came out of Agora Financial, my buddy Joe Schriefer over there. This is Obama's secret mistress exposed. Discover the shocking truth about what could be the most devastating affair in the history of the White House. What this promotion was all about was, it was all about what this copywriter presented as President Obama's infatuation with socialism. Again, right, wrong, or indifferent, whether you agree, disagree. This is what the copywriter wrote. And they presented it as a metaphor. They didn't, they could have simply said, right, like, President Obama's infatuation with socialism is killing the country. right? But they knew that that would have fell on deaf ears because it's been said. And so they created a metaphor to take that common idea of he's infatuated with socialism, and they wrapped it in mystery of Obama's secret mistress. They made it seem like, right, you know what that means. You get an understanding right away, a tangible gut, visceral understanding of what that means right away. This is an example from one of our marketing funnels at Marketing Funnel Automation. This was for a program called the Smart Funnel Formula. You know that I mentioned this in a prior lesson. And what this was about was teaching marketers how to create an adaptive, responsive marketing funnel, a smart funnel. At the time, this was way ahead of the curve. This was like advanced stuff, and explaining what a dynamic, responsive, interactive funnel is was complex and difficult. It still is quite complex and difficult. And so I presented this as it's like a living, breathing salesperson. And I built the marketing campaign and the marketing funnel around this idea of what would your response rates be? What would your results be? What would your sales conversions be? What would your sales be if you had a living, breathing salesperson that interacted with every single prospect and adapted to what it is that your prospects did and said, where they went on your website, right? If it adapted on the fly automatically, right? And so I presented it as something that they could grasp in the form of a metaphor. Now let's talk about developing big ideas. And the key word in this is developing, because big ideas don't just come to you. They're not going to pop in your head. They're not going to hit you like a flash of lightning. They are developed. They're orchestrated. They're created. It starts with you recognizing that you need lots of ideas. You need lots of ideas to come up with a big idea. And lots of ideas only come from lots of input. It's why the idea of a marketer not reading a lot, reading diverse books, diverse literature, diverse magazines, not watching the news, not seeing the movies that do extremely well, not watching the television shows that are extremely popular, not reading general information as well as market specific information, to me is insane, because they're limiting their input. And by limiting their input, they're limiting their output of ideas. Your ideas only stem from your input. And so in order to come up with lots of ideas, you have to have a lot of input. You have to have a lot of input and a lot of ideas in order to come up with a big idea. Don't expect to sit down and come up with 2 ideas and have one of them be a big idea. You need lots of ideas to come up with a big idea. Now, ideas are really all about looking for new or unusual combinations and or connections. It's just about you looking for new, different, unique, unusual combinations or connections between 2 or 3 different things that are seemingly disconnected, right? It's you seeing connections between 2 seemingly disconnected things. You have to also, when it comes to developing ideas, you have to find, develop, flesh out ideas that you believe in, that you're excited about, and that you're excited to tell others. You have to be passionate about these ideas. If you're not excited, that is going to come through in your marketing message. It's going to come through in your copy. You're not going to excite anybody else about your idea if you're not excited about the idea. Now, developing ideas stems from research. It stems from examining. It stems from what we talked about in an earlier module. It stems from the examination stage, right? Like Gene Schwartz said, you don't get an idea or a headline. You dig it out of the market research. You wring it out of your product. You read, you listen, you experiment, right? It's the creativity is not in you, Gene Schwartz said. It's in your market, right? It's in your prospects. It's in your product. All you're doing is joining the 2 together. That's why I shared with you earlier on in an earlier module, in earlier lessons, the enormous value and necessity of examination, the examination stage, the research stage. Gary Bencivenga, one of the greatest living copywriters, a copywriter who had controls for years, who could not be beat, who could not be knocked off, who's generated multiple millions of dollars in royalties for himself. He created this one control right here, and he had many, many controls, multiple controls, and he was working for Boardroom and in circles that were the most competitive in the world in terms of copywriters. When it came to this promotion, the story goes that Gary sent for every book that he could find on cholesterol. That's right, first and foremost, the level of examination and research and depth. He sent for every book that he could on cholesterol. And inside one of the books in the Framingham Heart Study, a 50-year study on heart disease, it showed and said that nobody with a cholesterol of 150 or below ever died from a heart attack. That is where that idea and headline came from that became a control, generated multiple millions of dollars and multiple millions of dollars for him in terms of royalties. It comes from the examination and research. This is an example of a mock headline that I wrote. U.S. Defense Agency claims this advertiser's trick is as neurologically addictive as a hit of cocaine. Marketers using this could see sales conversions as high as 34% the first time trying it. Where did this come from? It came from a book on storytelling. And there was a chapter in there that talked about that you can see it from the left-hand side, the bottom of the paragraph. It says, certain types of stories might be addictive and neurologically speaking, not that different from taking a tiny hit of cocaine. And you can see that individual was part of the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, in Arlington, Virginia. That's where that idea came from. The idea behind that copy, that there is this trick, that's neurologically as addictive as a hit of cocaine, came from one paragraph in one book. Again, it's important for you to understand that an idea is nothing more, nothing less than a new combination of old elements, of common elements, of elements that are seemingly disconnected. It's about discovery and assembling them. It's not about random inspiration or fancy pants creativity. It's not about you getting a flash of lightning and something hitting you. It's about assembling, discovering, wringing out, digging in, and finding, right? And the capacity to bring old elements into new combination depends on your ability to see relationships. And that ability to see relationships can be cultivated. It can be developed. So you might not be a natural at that. I'm certainly not a natural at that. My buddy Rich Schefrin is a natural. Jay Abraham is a natural. But the majority of people, copywriters, the best of the best that I know, are not naturals. It's a skill set that can be developed like any other skill set. It's all about seeing relationships between seemingly disconnected things. It was Porter very early on with that one promotion. There's a new railroad across America and it's making some people very rich, or whatever the subheadline was. That promotion, that idea, that promotion was all about how voice over IP was changing the telecommunications industry, how voice over IP was spreading across the United States and it would change the entire landscape of telecommunications. And the investors that knew that and understood that could get in and make a fortune based on the spread of voice over IP, a fiber optic cable across the United States. And what Porter saw was a relationship between that spread of fiber optic cable and what happened when the first railroads were built, and how guys like Vanderbilt made, these fortunes, early on, how titans of industry were created from that. He saw a relationship between two seemingly disconnected things, between the spread of fiber optic cable and when the railroads were built. And he brought them together for an idea that became a multi-million-dollar success. Now, this really stems from, and I cannot remember for the life of me the name of the book where I first read this, but it's what I refer to as the other Pareto principle, because this is something that came from Wilfredo Pareto, the gentleman that most people know as the 80-20 guy, well, he talked about this idea of a rentier versus a speculator. And the difference between the two is that a rentier, right, is this routine, steady, conserving individual, right? The typical individual that sees elements and sees them all as separate, different, disconnected bits of information. But then you've got the speculator, and speculators are the individuals that are preoccupied with new combinations, with the possibility of new combinations. They see elements not as totally separate, but as another kind of another link in the same chain. And they look for combinations. They're constantly on the lookout to see how things can be connected, how one thing can be connected to another, how your tire can be connected to your chair in your office, right? How the sign on the highway can be connected to the pencil in your drawer. They look for the possibility of new combinations. They're constantly, proactively, intentionally looking for these new combinations. I share this with you, and I'm including this in this lesson because I want you to function as a speculator. I want you to choose proactively, intentionally, to constantly be looking for combinations, to constantly look for relationships between things that the ordinary individual doesn't see a relationship between. That's how you begin to strengthen that muscle. That's how you begin to develop that skill set. Again, you cannot wait for inspiration to strike or an idea to pop into your head. It has to be developed. It has to be nurtured. It has to be fleshed out through the examination, through all of the data and information that I taught you how to collect through the examination stage on your competitors, on your prospects, on your product. It's why legendary copywriter John Capel said you should collect 7 times the amount of information that you think you're going to need. And Gary Bencivenga said, research with a hand truck. You can never have too much information. And Brian Kurtz of Boardroom said, be a bloodhound. And my buddy Mark Ford said, the better the input of content, the better the output of ideas. So what are some of the sources for you to tap into to develop ideas? Well, there are 2 different types of information, right? There are 2 different types of information. There's specific information that's related to your product, related to your prospect, that's market related stuff, that's product related information. And then there is general information, right? That's just a variety of information. It's a variety of different input, right? And it's important for you to understand that an idea results from a new combination of specific knowledge about your product and prospect with general knowledge about life and events and circumstances. Let me say that again. An idea results from, an idea comes about from a new combination of your specific knowledge about your product and prospect, which is where the specific information comes from, with general knowledge about life and events. That's where the general information comes from. That's why I said earlier that it is valuable and important for you to consume a variety of information, not just information related to your marketplace or niche. Some various sources just to kind of get your wheels spinning: books, magazines, newspapers, news programs, forums, Amazon comments, blogs, blog comments, professional trade journals, Facebook groups, podcasts, radio programs, YouTube, history, other experts' content, past promotions, etc. Again, the key to coming up with a big idea is to come up with lots of ideas and document them all. Don't prejudge them. Don't try to come up with ideas at the same time that you're judging the quality. Just come up with ideas and document them all. Do not judge them. And when possible, note proof points along the way. As you're digging and looking for ideas to develop the big idea, note proof points along the way. Remember, promises, your primary promise, the promises are cheap. They're bogus without proof. So you want to note proof points along the way. There's no value in an idea if there's no proof to back it up. Ideally, that proof should be both emotionally and intellectually appealing. And in an ideal world, look for blockbuster proof points, just tremendous, overwhelming proof points with massive credibility, that you can ultimately build your big idea around. It's another element, another way to kind of identify potential big ideas. When you see a big proof point, a mega proof point, somebody of extreme credibility or authority or recognition, or demonstration, note that, mark that down, because it can serve as a way to develop a really powerful idea. Now, as you're developing these ideas, as you're looking for them, as you're looking for intellectually interesting ideas, ideas that you can write, an intellectually interesting component that you can incorporate in with your primary promise and unique mechanism, there are a few questions that you can ask yourself. Really, there's 4 questions, right? And remember that when you're developing the idea is not the copy. During this stage, it's not about writing copy. You did not hear me talk about writing copy. You did not hear me talk about writing a headline. You did not hear me talk about headline formulas or anything like that. Because what we're talking about here is not writing copy. We're talking about the idea, simply the idea, regardless of how pithy or crisp or clear you can state it. So first and foremost, ask yourself, why would this interest the prospect? Why would this be of interest to your prospect? Why would the prospect care, right? When you come up with an idea, what does this mean to the prospect? How does this impact the prospect? You have to understand these. You have to understand these questions when you're developing your big idea. And when you're developing your big idea, give yourself time. Be patient. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. This is not a rush. You have to be patient to dig. Like I've said many times before, if I had 4 weeks to create a marketing funnel, I would take 2 weeks to do the examination, to dig, to find the big idea. You have to be patient with yourself. And when you develop an idea, when you come up with an idea and you ask yourself those questions and you feel the need to expand the idea, you have the feeling, the desire to add in additional components of the idea, to expand it. It's almost always because you have not yet gotten clear on the big idea. You have not yet identified a single big idea. The elevator pitch test is, again, not about copy. You have to be able to sum up your big idea with a concise statement that expresses your idea powerfully and simply. You got to be able to articulate it in just a few seconds. Think of if you were at a social gathering, a party, cocktail hour, or whatever, and you had an idea that you wanted to run by somebody to see if they would be compelled by it, interested by it. You'd throw out the idea. You wouldn't take a half hour, you wouldn't take 20 minutes, and you wouldn't rattle off copy. You'd share the idea and you would see what they would say, right? Like the Obama's mistress, right? If that was simply that Obama's got a mistress, and that mistress that nobody really fully understands is causing him to bring the country down. Somebody that is interested might say, tell me more about that. I need to know about this mistress. What's the deal? Simple statement, concise, easy, immediately understandable. So the process for developing the big idea is doing the research, the examination, putting together some notes, and then beginning to organize those notes based on the answering of those 4 questions, right? Like, looking for connections between seemingly disconnected things, coming up with ideas, and then ultimately identifying your big idea, and then writing it out and then polishing it, which we're going to do later on. Now, one final note, it's important for you to understand that big ideas exist within a context. They exist within a point in time. What was a big idea 3 months ago may not be a big idea today. What was a big idea a year ago in many markets is certainly not a big idea today. So do not steal. Do not take from somebody else's big idea that you saw work a year ago, 8 months ago, 6 months ago. You shouldn't be stealing anybody's idea to begin with. But there is, it's to your detriment if you do, because again, big ideas exist within a context, and sometimes those ideas have a very limited window. Sometimes they're months, sometimes they're a year, sometimes they're a couple of years. Rarely do they run that long, because again, in order to be fresh, timely, unique, and different, it's you got to see it within context. And so do not steal. Again, what we're looking for is an idea that is so compelling, so big, so startling, so arresting. It's one idea, one story, one emotion, right? It is one promise. It is one thing that you want them to think. It is intellectually interesting and emotionally compelling because it's built on a primary promise with a unique mechanism. And so now is time for you to go to work, take out your worksheet, and begin to fill in each piece to develop your big idea. With that, continue on to Module 4.